This is my true story. I built a home where love was supposed to live. I raised my son under that roof, gave him food, warmth, and everything I never had. But the man I raised turned cold. One night, he pointed at the shed behind the house and told me, "Sleep there, old man." I walked out quietly, holding nothing but my blanket and my pain. That night, something inside me changed forever. What he found on the door the next morning destroyed his pride. Before I tell you, say where you're watching from and what time it is. And please subscribe so more people hear my story. The house didn't come from money. It came from hands, tired, cracked, and blistered. I built it slowly, one wall at a time, one paycheck after another. Every corner of that home carried a piece of me. The doors I carved, the roof I nailed, the garden I planted, they were all built with purpose. I wanted a place where my family could sleep safely, where my son would never have to see the kind of hunger I once knew. It wasn't just a house, it was a promise. That no matter what happened, he would never be without shelter or love. When he was small, he followed me everywhere. He held the hammer when I worked. He ran barefoot across the floors I laid. He called me strong. He said he wanted to grow up and be just like me. I carried those words for years, even when my back started to give out, even when my hands could no longer lift heavy things. Every sacrifice I made felt worth it because it was for him. I paid for his school by selling the small piece of land my father left me. I skipped meals so he could have books. I worked nights at the factory after long days fixing other people's roofs. I told everyone my son would rise higher than I ever did, and he did. He found a good job, married a woman who wanted more than I could ever offer, and came back home with a new tone in his voice, one that didn't sound like gratitude. At first it was small things. A sigh when I asked questions. A closed door when I tried to talk. Then came the looks, from her, mostly. Cold eyes, quiet whispers. She said the house looked old. She said I made the place feel crowded. And slowly he started to agree. I tried to stay out of their way. I spent my days in the garden, fixing broken tools, patching fences that didn't need repair, pretending not to hear their arguments about me. I ate dinner alone more often than not. My chair at the table became unnecessary. My room became smaller. The laughter in the house was no longer mine to share. Still, I stayed. Because that house was mine. Because I believed that blood, no matter how distant, would still remember who built the walls they lived behind. But one night, when the light from the kitchen spilled into the hallway and his voice cut through the silence, I understood that the house I built no longer had room for me. The night was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy. I had finished my small meal, a piece of bread and soup I had warmed myself, and went to sit in the living room. The clock ticked softly on the wall. I could hear their voices from the kitchen, sharp whispers that carried just enough for me to know they were about me again. I didn't move. I just sat there, staring at the wooden table I had built decades ago, remembering when that same table was filled with laughter, not tension. Then he walked in. His footsteps were quick, impatient. His wife followed, her arms crossed, her face hard. I didn't look up right away. I already knew what was coming. That tone, that look, that distance. I had seen it before in strangers, never in my own son. He stopped in front of me, arms folded, eyes filled with the kind of cold that doesn't belong to family. He said I was taking up too much space, that I made them uncomfortable. My stomach sank. He pointed toward the window, toward the dark shape of the shed behind the house. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Each word landed like a stone. "Sleep there, old man." The air went still. Even the clock seemed to stop ticking. His wife turned away, hiding a small smile. I looked at my son, really looked at him. The boy I once carried on my shoulders, who used to sleep against my chest during storms, was gone. What stood before me was a stranger with my blood. I didn't speak. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. My voice would have broken if I tried. So I stood up slowly, every bone in my back aching, every step heavier than the last. I walked to my room, folded my blanket, picked up my pillow, and carried them quietly through the hallway. As I reached the back door, I paused for a moment. My hand rested on the frame I had built when he was a child. His small handprint was still there in the corner, pressed into the old paint. I ran my fingers over it once, soft, almost afraid, and then stepped outside. The cold air hit my face. The grass was wet from dew. The moonlight made the shed look smaller than I remembered. The hinges creaked when I pushed the door open. Inside smelled of dust, oil, and forgotten tools. I laid my blanket on the ground and sat down slowly. The floor was hard, but the pain in my chest hurt more than the ache in my back. I listened to the faint laughter coming from the house, from the kitchen I built, from the room where I once told bedtime stories. Every sound stabbed deeper. I looked through the small gap in the wooden wall. From there, I could see the light shining through the window. My son's shadow passed by once, twice, then disappeared. The night grew colder. I pulled the blanket tighter. I couldn't sleep. My hands shook. My breath came in short, quiet bursts. I wasn't crying, but my eyes burned the way tears would. That was the night everything ended. Not the love of a father, but the illusion that love alone could be enough. The shed smelled like oil and dirt, but it also smelled like truth. And as I lay there on the floor, surrounded by the echoes of a life I built for others, I made a promise to myself. The sun would rise, and so would I. But not as the man they thought they could break. The shed was small, made of old wood and rusted nails. I had built it years ago to store tools, never imagining it would one day hold me. The air inside was heavy with the smell of oil and dust. Cobwebs hung in the corners, and the floor was littered with sawdust and old nails. I spread my thin blanket on the ground and lay down carefully, trying not to stir the rats that moved quietly behind the boxes. The floor was hard. Every breath I took made the air colder. My back ached, my hands were stiff, but the pain in my chest was worse than any wound. Through the cracks in the wooden wall, I could see a faint yellow light from the house. It flickered against the window glass, like a reminder of what I had lost. I could hear muffled laughter from inside, their voices, calm, content, pretending I didn't exist. I stared at that light until my eyes hurt. That was my home once. Every part of it had my touch, my work, my time. And now, I was watching it from outside, like a stranger standing in the dark. The silence in that shed wasn't peace. It was punishment. Every sound, a creak, a whisper, a gust of wind, felt like it was reminding me of how far I had fallen. The same hands that built that house now lay trembling on the cold floor. The same man who worked years to give his son comfort now slept where the tools were kept. I thought about the years that led here, the long nights at work, the birthdays I missed, the exhaustion that never stopped. I remembered when I used to sit in that house, proud, thinking I had done something good with my life. I had built a home. I had raised a son. I had done everything a father was supposed to do. I thought that was enough. But the silence around me said otherwise. I turned to my side, trying to find warmth where there was none. The blanket was thin, barely covering my legs. The air bit into my skin. The wind slipped through the cracks and stung my face. I pulled my arms close to my chest and closed my eyes. For a moment, I tried to sleep, but my mind wouldn't stop moving. I kept seeing his face, not the man who sent me out here, but the boy who once held my hand while crossing the road, the boy who waited for me at the gate every evening, the boy who said, "I want to build a house like yours, Dad." That boy was gone. The man inside that house was someone else, someone who saw me as old, as useless, as weight. The clock inside struck midnight. I could hear it faintly through the walls. My heart beat slowly in rhythm with it. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling made of wood I once nailed myself. Each plank reminded me that I had built my own prison. I wondered how things changed. Maybe it wasn't one moment, but a slow decay. The way wood rots when no one looks. The way love fades when respect leaves. Maybe I ignored it too long, hoping it would fix itself. But it didn't. And now, this was my reality. The rats moved again. I didn't care. I had stopped being afraid of small things. I had lived through bigger hurts. I reached into my pocket and felt the rough texture of my old keys. The same keys that unlocked that house for decades. They still fit the doors. They still belonged to me. For a moment, I held them tight in my fist. Then I placed them beside me on the floor, staring at them in the dim light. The night stretched on endlessly. The laughter inside had stopped. The lights went out. Silence filled the air like fog. I closed my eyes again, not to rest, but to think. My heart didn't burn with anger. It froze with clarity. In that darkness, one truth became clear. I had given everything, and they had taken everything. But they had forgotten something. Everything still had my name on it. By morning, they would remember who built that roof. The cold didn't let me sleep. Every hour felt longer than the one before. The floor pressed against my bones, and the smell of dust filled my lungs. The small lamp I carried had gone out, leaving only the faint light from the house window cutting through the cracks in the wall. I lay there awake, staring at that light until my eyes blurred. It felt like a cruel reminder that comfort was only a few steps away, yet no longer mine to reach. I listened to the night, the sound of the wind, the faint dripping of water from a leaking pipe, the quiet scurrying of rats, and each sound seemed to echo the same truth. I was alone. I turned over and looked at the ceiling. The wooden beams creaked softly as the wind pushed against the roof. I built that roof with my own hands years ago. It was supposed to protect tools from rain, not hold the man who built it. My palms were rough, lined with scars from those years of work. I lifted them toward the faint light and stared at them. These were the same hands that once fed my family, that once carried my son on my shoulders, that once signed every paper that gave him the life he lives now. But in the end, these hands became the ones that were cast out. I thought about my wife. She had died years ago, but her memory stayed in the walls of that house. She loved that boy more than life itself. She would have never believed he could become this. She used to say, "Our son will take care of us when we're old." I remembered her voice, soft and full of faith. If she were here tonight and saw where I was lying, it would have broken her heart. Maybe it's better she never saw it. My thoughts drifted between memory and silence. I remembered the years I struggled just to keep food on the table. The long nights fixing roofs in the rain. The times I came home covered in dirt, still smiling because I could hear my son laughing from inside. I remembered giving him my savings when he wanted to start his business, signing documents in his name because he didn't have the credit yet. I did it with pride, never realizing I was handing over my own peace of mind. I sat up, stretching my legs, my knees cracking from stiffness. The shed door rattled in the wind. My blanket was damp from the cold floor. I could feel every ache in my back, every throb in my hands, but my heart had gone numb. I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel sadness. What I felt was understanding, a kind of hard truth that comes when all illusions are gone. I realized I had nothing left to lose, not love, not respect, not a home. Everything they could take from me, they already had. But there was one thing still mine: the house itself. My name was still printed clearly on the title. It had never been transferred. Every brick, every inch of land still belonged to me. He lived there because I allowed it. He had forgotten that part. The thought was quiet but sharp. I stared at the faint outline of the house through the small shed window, the roof I built, the lights I paid for, the doors I installed. They had everything because of me. But if I wanted, I could take it all away, not with violence, not with shouting, just with a few signatures. The night stretched on. My body trembled from the cold, but my mind was awake, steady, and clear. I wasn't thinking of revenge. I was thinking of dignity. There's a moment when a father stops being a victim and becomes something else, a man who finally remembers his worth. By the time the first light touched the horizon, I had made my decision. The sun rose slowly behind the house, painting the roof golden. The same roof that once sheltered him. The same roof that no longer felt like home. I stood up, folded my blanket, and picked up my keys. The metal felt cold in my hand, but it gave me strength. I looked at the house one last time through the window and whispered to myself, Not in anger, not in pain, but in certainty. By sunrise, he would learn who still owned the walls that held his pride. The sky was pale when I stepped out of the shed. The air carried that sharp chill that only comes before dawn, the kind that wakes you fully, even after a sleepless night. My body ached, but my mind was calm. I looked at the house one last time before walking away. The windows were still dark, the curtains closed, the same walls I built now hiding the people who had turned me out. I didn't feel hate. What I felt was clarity, a kind of quiet strength I hadn't felt in years, the kind that comes when you realize there's nothing more they can take from you. I walked down the road slowly, one step at a time, until I reached the main street. The world was still asleep. Shops were closed. The air smelled faintly of smoke and dew, and my breath came out in small clouds. Every sound felt louder in the silence, the echo of my shoes on the pavement, the hum of a faraway truck, the faint call of birds waking in the distance. I had no plan when I left the shed, but my feet knew where to go. When I reached the bus stop, the first morning bus was just pulling in. I climbed aboard, found a seat by the window, and sat in silence. The city passed by slowly, rows of old houses, fields still wet with frost, the sun beginning to stretch over rooftops. I watched everything without thought. My reflection in the glass looked older than I remembered, but there was something steady in my eyes. For years, I had lived with my head bowed, accepting whatever life gave. That morning, I lifted it again. When the bus reached town, I stepped off and walked toward the small office building at the end of the street. The paint on the sign was fading, but the name below it was still clear. The lawyer I had known for decades still worked there. I pushed open the door, and the faint smell of paper and coffee filled the air. The clerk looked up from the desk, surprised to see me so early. I told her my name, and within minutes, I was sitting in the same office where I had signed the papers to buy my house so many years ago. The lawyer was older now, gray hair and glasses sliding down his nose, but his eyes still sharp. He asked if I was well. I nodded once. There wasn't much to say. I placed my ID and house documents on the desk. The same documents that still bore my name, my handwriting at the bottom, my signature across the seal. I told him what I wanted done. No anger, no long explanation, just facts. I wanted it sold, immediately. He looked at me for a long moment before speaking. His face softened. "Are you sure?" I could tell he already knew the answer. I nodded again. "Every inch," I said quietly. "I have no home there anymore." The papers were drawn up quickly. Decades of loyalty and familiarity made the process smooth. He handled the legal work with care, reviewing every signature twice. I watched him stamp the papers, his hand pressing the seal firmly into the corner. That sound, the thud of the stamp, echoed like closure. By the time the sun rose high enough to touch the top of the trees outside, it was done. The house that took me half a lifetime to build no longer belonged to me, and because of that, it no longer belonged to him either. It belonged to no one now but the truth. As I left the office, the lawyer stood and shook my hand. His grip was firm, steady. He didn't ask for reasons. He didn't need to. There are some decisions that explain themselves. Outside, the town had come alive. People hurried through the streets, buses roared, markets opened. Life was moving again. I walked past it all, quiet, unnoticed, at peace. My steps were slower, but lighter. There's a strange calm that comes when you stop asking life to be fair and simply start reclaiming what's yours, even if it means walking away. The sun was bright now, cutting through the morning fog. I reached the end of the road, looked toward the direction of my house, and whispered to myself, not in anger, but in finality. The house was never my prison. It was my lesson. By late morning, everything was finished. The sale was complete, the ownership transferred, the signatures sealed. The papers were still warm from the stamp when the lawyer placed them in an envelope and handed them to me. The house that took half a lifetime to build now belonged to another man. I didn't look back as I walked out of that office, holding the envelope tightly in my hand. My feet felt heavier than usual, but my mind felt clean. There was no joy, no pain, just a deep, steady silence inside me, the kind that comes when something has truly ended. I stopped by a small shop on the corner and bought a plain envelope. I slipped the property papers inside along with a single note written in my slow, shaky handwriting. I didn't use many words. I didn't need to. Words had lost their meaning in that house long ago. The note said only this: "The shed is yours now. The house is not." I sealed it, pressed the edges flat, and held it against my chest for a moment before walking back. The road home felt longer than ever. The sun was rising higher, and the heat pressed down on my neck. Every step stirred memories. The tree I planted the year he was born, the small shop where I used to buy his favorite sweets, the corner where he once waited for me after work. It all felt distant now, like old photographs fading in sunlight. By the time I reached the gate, my legs were trembling from exhaustion, but I stood still for a long moment before entering. The yard was quiet. The garden I once cared for was overgrown. The grass brushed against my ankles as I walked. The air smelled of damp soil and neglect. I looked at the shed, my bed from the night before, then at the house. Its windows were open, the curtains dancing lightly in the wind, unaware of what was about to change. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. Some endings don't require words, only actions. I walked up to the front door, placed the envelope carefully against it, and pressed it flat under the welcome mat. My hands were shaking slightly, not from doubt, but from the weight of finality. For years, I had knocked on this same door, waiting for it to open. Today, I was leaving something behind instead. Before walking away, I looked around the yard one last time. The paint on the walls was peeling. The windowsills I had built were still strong. The roof I fixed 100 times still held. Everything I built would now belong to strangers. But that was all right. The house would continue to stand, just not as his throne. I turned back toward the gate, my steps slow but sure. Every footstep on the gravel sounded like closure. I didn't look back again. The letter would do all the talking I never could. It would tell him what my silence had been trying to say for years, that love is not a weakness, but patience has limits. When I reached the road, I took one last deep breath. The town stretched before me, filled with faces I didn't know and places I hadn't seen in years. I realized I had spent so long living for others that I'd forgotten what it meant to live for myself. For the first time, I didn't feel trapped by age or betrayal. I felt free. That envelope on the door wasn't revenge, it was truth. A reminder written on paper that respect isn't inherited. It's earned and lost like everything else. He had treated me like a burden, forgetting the foundation he stood on was built by my hands. Now he would wake up and see the cost of his arrogance printed in black and white. I didn't wait to see his reaction. I didn't need to. The sound of birds and the morning wind were enough. Behind me stood a house stripped of pride. Ahead of me stretched the road to peace. And somewhere between them, a father finally found his strength again. The sun was high when he opened the door. The light fell directly on the envelope lying under the mat. He bent down, thinking it was mail, something ordinary, something unimportant. He didn't know that inside those few folded pages waited the end of everything he thought he owned. He tore it open carelessly, but the sound of paper ripping was louder than he expected. The first page was the sale deed, stamped, signed, sealed, and final. His name wasn't on it. Mine was. The house he slept in, the walls he painted, the roof that kept him dry, all gone. The second page was the note, written in small, clear letters. He read it once, then again, then again. His face turned pale. The words were simple, but they carried more weight than a lifetime of shouting. The shed is yours now. The house is not. For a long time, he stood there frozen, staring at the papers. His wife came out behind him, asking what was wrong. He didn't answer. He couldn't. The morning breeze fluttered the pages in his hands. He read the signatures again, trying to find a mistake, trying to prove it wasn't real. But the truth was, printed there in black ink, the same signature that had built his world had also taken it away. He called my name, once, twice, but I was already far from the house. He rushed outside, scanning the road, his voice rising, desperate. The neighbors heard him shouting. They came to their gates, curious, whispering among themselves. His wife ran back inside, flipping through drawers, searching for proof that the house was still theirs. But all she found were old memories, utility bills in my name, tax receipts with my signature, documents that all pointed to the same truth. He dropped to his knees on the porch, still holding the papers, his hands shaking. The man who once looked down on me now looked small. The same neighbors who once heard him mock me now watched as his pride cracked in front of them. Some felt pity, others didn't. People remember everything, especially cruelty. He stormed inside, dialing my number again and again, but I had already changed it. I didn't want to hear excuses. I didn't want to hear regret that came too late. I imagined him pacing the floors, realizing that every piece of furniture, every tile, every wall he thought he owned was gone. His wife followed behind, shouting questions, her voice sharp, angry, scared. He didn't have answers. By noon, the new owner arrived. He came with papers, police officers, and authority. The house was his now, legally, completely. My son's pride couldn't stop what had already been done. The officers stood by the gate, calm but firm, telling them they had to leave. 1 hour. That's all they were given. An hour to pack a lifetime of arrogance into boxes. The street filled with whispers. Curtains moved. Faces peeked out of windows. The town that once respected my son for his success now watched his fall. People who once envied him now pitied him. A few shook their heads. A few smiled quietly. Life has a way of showing balance, even without revenge. When the last minute passed, they stepped out, their belongings scattered in bags and boxes on the lawn. The wife cried, asking where they would go. He didn't answer. He just sat on the steps, his hands gripping his head. The house that had made him feel powerful was no longer his shelter. It was just a building that belonged to someone else. I was told all this later by a neighbor who saw everything. She said the look on his face wasn't anger. It was disbelief. Like a man seeing the reflection of what he had become for the first time. That morning, he had sent his father to sleep with the tools. By noon, he was the one standing outside, stripped of everything his father built. The world has strange ways of teaching lessons. Some come with words, some come with silence, and some come with an envelope left quietly at a door. The new owner didn't waste time. By evening, the moving trucks arrived, the locks were changed, and the papers were posted on the gate for everyone to see. It was official, public, final. The same house that once held his laughter and arrogance now stood behind a locked door that no longer recognized his key. He stood on the street with his wife beside him, holding boxes filled with clothes, dishes, and old memories. The neighbors watched quietly from their porches. No one spoke, no one helped. Respect doesn't disappear suddenly. It drains, slowly, and that day, it was completely gone. His wife was the first to break. She shouted, cried, blamed him. She said she never wanted to live in that old house anyway. She threw the box she was carrying onto the ground, scattering broken plates across the pavement. He didn't respond. He just stared at the front door, the same door where I once carried him in my arms as a child. The same door where he used to wait for me to come home from work, running into my arms with excitement. Now he stood outside it like a stranger. The police officer handed him the final document and nodded politely before leaving. There was nothing more to say. The law had done its part. The rest was his own doing. He sat down on the curb, the papers resting on his knees, his fingers gripping them so tightly they began to crumple. His wife walked away toward her parents' house, shouting as she went. He didn't follow. One by one, the neighbors turned away. The sun began to set, painting the sky in deep orange light. He stayed there, unmoving, a shadow among the things he once owned. When darkness fell, he picked up his boxes, dragged them down the road, and disappeared into the night. That was how pride ends, not with a crash, but with silence. The next morning, he tried calling me again. The number no longer existed. He sent messages to relatives, friends, anyone who might know where I went. But I had already gone somewhere new, somewhere quiet. I didn't leave an address. I didn't want visitors. I didn't want to see him looking for pity. There are moments when forgiveness is too small for what's been done. Days turned into weeks. The town moved on, but people didn't forget. They whispered when his name came up. The son who sent his father to sleep in the shed had been left without a roof. A cruel story, they said, but a fair one. Even those who pitied him admitted they understood why it happened. You can't humiliate the one who built your foundation and expect the walls to stand forever. He tried to rebuild his life, but nothing worked. His job faltered, his friends distanced themselves, his wife never returned. The house had been more than shelter. It had been his symbol of success, his armor against the world. Without it, he was just another man, ordinary and exposed. He moved into a rented room on the edge of town, small and quiet. The same town where everyone knew what he'd done. Shame follows louder than footsteps. I heard from someone that he started visiting the old street sometimes, standing near the gate, staring at the house from a distance. The new owner had repainted it, planted flowers, made it beautiful again. But for him, it wasn't just a building. It was the monument to his own fall. The shed still stood behind it, quiet, empty, untouched. I wondered if he ever walked back there, if he ever opened that door and remembered the night he sent me out. He learned what I already knew. Everything we build has weight, and when you build it on disrespect, it will eventually crush you. His fall wasn't sudden. It was slow, like dusk fading into night. One decision, one sentence, one act of cruelty. That's all it took to turn a home into history. He lost his house. He lost his pride, but most of all, he lost his father, not through death, but through realization. The town didn't forget what happened. People told the story quietly at the market, in the barber shop, in the line at the post office. They said it with low voices, like it was something sacred, a warning about pride and consequence. The man who forced his father to sleep in the shed had lost everything in a single sunrise, and not by a fight, not by anger, not by revenge, but by a signature. That was what made it sting the most. The punishment wasn't loud. It was quiet, legal, final. The kind that can't be undone with tears. For weeks I heard from others what became of him. He tried to find work again, but no one wanted to hire him. People respected money, but they respected decency more. They had all seen how he treated me. No one trusted a man who could betray his own blood. He went from one office to another, holding a resume that no one cared to read. The proud voice that once ordered me around now begged for a chance. He began selling small things. First, his car. Then the furniture they had taken from the house. Piece by piece, his world shrank. He started visiting relatives, asking for help. But they all shook their heads. Some said they didn't have room. Others said they didn't want to get involved. What they really meant was they didn't want to associate with shame. His arrogance had burned every bridge, and now there was no one left to call. I stayed silent through it all. I didn't feel joy. I didn't want to see him suffer. I had simply closed a door that had already been shut on me long ago. My silence wasn't revenge. It was release. For the first time in years, I slept without heaviness. I no longer walked on eggshells in my own home. I no longer waited for kindness that never came. The world felt still again, and peace, for me, was enough. The house I sold stood tall and strong, better cared for than it had been in years. The new owner repainted the walls, fixed the roof, planted flowers where weeds once grew. Every time I passed by, I didn't feel regret. I felt distance. I had built that place for love, but love had turned into pride, and pride had destroyed it. Now, it simply stood as a building. Not a memory, not a wound, just stone and wood, quiet and still. People in the town started greeting me differently. Before, they pitied me. Now, they nodded with quiet respect. They saw not a broken man, but a man who had chosen dignity. They said I did the right thing, though they also said they couldn't have done it themselves. I told them there was nothing brave about it, only necessary. Sometimes the hardest decisions come when the heart is already numb. My son eventually stopped being seen around town. Some said he moved away. Some said he lived on the edge of the city, renting small rooms, working odd jobs. I didn't look for him. I had already found my closure the night he sent me to that shed. Whatever he did after was between him and his conscience. When people asked if I missed him, I said yes, but not the man he became. I missed the boy he once was, the one who helped me carry bricks, the one who smiled when I lifted him to fix the roof. That boy was gone long before the house was sold, and I had already mourned him. There's a moment in every father's life when he realizes his love can't fix everything. Mine came that night in the shed, and though the pain stayed for a while, it eventually turned into something stronger: self-respect. I learned that sometimes silence can speak louder than anger, and paper can carry more power than words. The lesson wasn't for him alone, it was for me too. That even when the world turns its back, a man still has the right to stand tall. Even if it's in the cold. Even if it's in the dark. The years passed quietly after that day. The town changed, new houses were built, old ones torn down, faces came and went. But the story stayed. People didn't forget. It became something they whispered to their children, a lesson about respect, about how quickly pride can destroy what love built. I grew older, slower, but lighter inside. The weight I had carried for years was gone. Every morning I woke up to peace instead of pain. I didn't live in luxury, but I lived in dignity, and that was enough. Sometimes I would walk past the road that led to my old house. I never turned in. I didn't need to. The new family that lived there took good care of it. The walls were clean, the roof was freshly painted, and flowers grew where dust once gathered. They didn't know the story. They didn't need to. To them, it was just a house. But to me, it was a reminder that not every ending is meant to be bitter. Some endings are simply quiet corrections, the world setting itself right again. I had learned something I wished I had known years earlier. Forgiveness doesn't always mean returning. Sometimes it means walking away and never looking back. I didn't hate my son. I had no energy left for hate. I had loved him deeply once, and that love, even in its broken state, had already done its job. It had taught him consequences. It had taught him that cruelty comes with a price. I never saw him again, but sometimes, in the marketplace or on the edge of the town, I heard whispers that he was still around. People said he lived quietly now, working small jobs, renting small rooms. They said he never spoke of me. I think he carried his guilt in silence, just as I carried my pain in silence all those years. That was enough for both of us. There were nights when I still thought about that shed. I could still smell the dust, feel the rough floor against my back, hear the faint sound of laughter coming from the house. But now, the memory didn't sting the same way. It didn't feel like shame anymore. It felt like a turning point. The exact moment I stopped begging for respect and started reclaiming it. The shed wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of my freedom. As time passed, people in town would nod when they saw me. Some called me wise. Others said I had done what every father dreams of doing but never dares. But I didn't feel like a hero. I was just a man who had reached his limit. Love can build a house, but respect is what keeps it standing. When respect is gone, even the strongest walls collapse. In the evenings, I often sat outside my small cottage, watching the sun disappear behind the hills. The sky always turned gold before fading into gray, a quiet reminder that every ending can still be beautiful. I didn't own much anymore, just a few things: a chair, a lamp, and my peace. That was enough. I kept one thing from the old house, the small wooden keychain my son had made for me when he was little. It was shaped like a hammer, rough and uneven, carved with his tiny hands. It used to hang from the keys to the house. Now it sat on my table, beside my cup of tea. I never threw it away. I never could. It reminded me that before everything went wrong, there had been love. And that was enough to forgive, even from afar. He told me to sleep in the shed, forgetting who built the roof over his head. The next morning, he found out what happens when a father finally wakes up. Final thought. He gave me the cold floor to sleep on, so I gave him the ground beneath his pride. In the end, he learned that houses can be rebuilt, but respect, once lost, never returns.